A topic that was suggested on the Game Wisdom Discord for a critical thought was, why can someone be bad at a video game? And it's a very interesting point because a lot of people will just argue, well, who cares if someone's bad at a game? Just get good or get out. But understanding what areas can lead to pain points, difficulty spikes, and frustrations is a very useful tip for any game designer when it comes to improving the playability and the onboarding of their game. As we've talked about many times here, churn rates and completion rates are very important from an analytical standpoint to study for any game designer. And no matter how influential, no matter how famous or thought-provoking or artistic a game will be, there is not one video game that has ever been made that has achieved 100% completion rate from its audience. People can quit games after minutes, hours, seconds. There's very little or very much a lot of things that can stop someone from playing. And to return to our little stinger at the start here, skill in a video game is oftentimes something that's very hard to put into words. And when it comes to designing a game's difficulty curve or progression curve, it's something you need to consider when it comes to the intended audience of your game. Every game is going to start with its most easiest content. But if easy for one game is like starting at the end of Super Meat Boy, well, that's going to stop a lot of people from playing. And when we look at things that can stop someone or things that can kind of get in the way of someone from learning the game, there are several different categories we can examine here. So let's start with the most obvious: reflexes, hand-eye coordination, APM, however you want to call it. That there are a lot of people who don't have the reflexes needed to play very high-speed games. This was one of the reasons that led to a major barrier of entry of high-extreme or high-octane action games, your Devil May Cry's, the original God of Wars, and so on. And in an interesting aside, why we saw this very big push into adding RPG abstractions with stuff like Borderlands, the latest God of War, Assassin's Creed, and so on and so forth, as a way of kind of softening the amount of skill or reducing the amount of reflex skill needed to play these games. Now, of course, that has led to its own interesting hurdles and complaints, as everyone knows about my thoughts on gear rating systems, but that will be a topic for another day. When it comes to reflexes, or reflexes causing an issue for someone to play, some of this can be, again, attributed to your control scheme or your UI. If you remember that lengthy video lesson I did a few weeks prior, which maybe I'll include somewhere in a corner right now. But the more involved your control scheme is, the harder it's going to be for someone who doesn't have really good hand-eye coordination in order to make use of it. Again, if I have to press A while pressing Y, while holding down the left trigger, while manipulating this right analog stick, while pressing star, which I literally can't do right now, that's going to be a very huge barrier of entry, and it's going to stop a lot of people. The more button-heavy your control scheme, it's going to make it harder for people to get into. And again, if your game does not feature the ability to rebind controls, that's another very big no-no, especially for people who are having enough trouble learning the game. Now they have to deal with this very weird UI as well. Now, in terms of in terms of reflexes being a point where people can be bad at, this is also another reason why we saw this push of casual games that kind of reduce the complexity of genres. Endless Runners would be an example. The idea of auto combos in fighting games would work here. The ability to add in approachability or accessibility options, such as making your characters do more damage, letting things happen automatically, things along those lines. Again, the fewer buttons someone needs to interact with, the easier it's going to be to play and learn that game. Now, when you're trying to get someone to play some of these titles, again, you need to be really much aware of how you onboard someone in terms of the various actions, and again, how many buttons you're going to use for your game. One of the biggest things that we've talked about are context-sensitive commands. So that instead of needing 5 buttons, you can tie 5 commands to one button and have it proc when the context is necessary. You can look at something like the Zelda games as a really good example of this. Zelda is about action adventure. It's not about hardcore platforming, or at least in the majority of them. So when we got to the 3D era with Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, Nintendo just said, just let Link jump automatically when he comes to the end of a ledge. It's not necessarily part of the core gameplay loop, so why should we test someone with that? And that is a very important point for our video today, as my camera zooms in out of focus there. Whatever is part of your core gameplay loop, you want to make sure that is as well polished and as well designed as you can be. If you're going to add different systems to your game that are separate from the core gameplay loop, you need to be aware of how that factors into what someone's good or bad at. And I will be coming back to that one in a few minutes. So the second aspect, or the second area where people can be bad at games, is when it comes to complexity or RPG-based systems. Some people just want to play a game that's about you running around with a giant stick and smacking bad guys with it. Other people want to spend minutes, hours, days trying to build their perfect character, their perfect deck, get their faction and their galactic empire completely working. And again, there are people who cannot play a Dark Souls or a Mario or even, like a casual endless runner to save their life, and they can probably sit for hours on end and build the most functionally, most powerful empire in a game like Stellaris or Europa Universalis. Or they could play one of the many grand strategy, war game, grognard level stuff that's out there. But understanding how all this stuff works leads to its own sense of complexity. If I hit you with a stick and it says 1 point of damage, and the enemy sneezes on me and now I take 6,548 damage, I have no idea why, I'm going to end up being frustrated and leaving that game. When we talk about why someone can be bad at strategy or more abstracted design, a lot of this is really factored into, well, obviously the UI. If the UI doesn't do a well enough job of explaining how certain things work, why are things happening the way they should, and the player is just pushing buttons and just going, well, I won, or I lost, that's not going to lead to them learning these games. And again, it's why tutorials and onboarding in abstracted design is very important. And I have another critical thought on such a topic I want to discuss at a later date. But when you're looking at what can stop someone from learning an abstracted-based game, look at how you're presenting information to the player. Are you starting the game off with 70 different stats and attributes and perks and bonuses and special abilities, and you have to build your character exactly right at the very first second or your game is ruined? Or can you space this out? Can you onboard the player into what makes a good character? Or let progression flow naturally or progress as you level up and gain in power. It's why, for a lot of gamers, that the JRPG style of RPGs where you're leveling and progressing your character through play is far more affordable or accessible compared to the CRPG or Western RPG style of, here's 6 characters, build their entire party composition and kit right this moment when you start, or you die. And again, this is one of those reasons why we've seen this pairing or this merging of reflex and abstracted design as a way of providing a bridge between the two for people who may not be the best at one or the other. If I am a really great hand-eye coordinated, shoot them first and get all the headshot kind of person, I don't need to worry about, did I perfectly min-max my stamina and my dexterity? I'm just going to shoot all these enemies in the head. But if I'm not good at reflex-driven gameplay, and I can't land those headshots to save my life, well, I'll just build the most perfectly optimized character who breaks the game, and who cares if I can't swing a sword perfectly or shoot when I can just beat everyone else this way. Now, we've talked about reflex, we've talked about action, but there's still another aspect to this, and that is critical thinking or puzzle solving. While this is definitely prevalent in adventure-based games, that hasn't stopped developers from implementing puzzles in action and reflex-driven titles as well. When we've seen the multitude of riddles and brain teasers in a game like Resident Evil, all the puzzles of something like The Witness, the sheer explosion of different puzzles, designs, and philosophies in all the adventure games that we've played and reviewed here. And this is a very hard area when it comes to understanding why someone would be bad at this. And it's something that I've talked about many times before when it comes to the difference between in-game knowledge and real-world or outside knowledge. If I want to build a puzzle about, let's say, throwing fireballs at different plants to emit different smokes or create different clouds to hurt enemies, that's something that we can explain in game. We can teach the player that blue plants when they emit smoke is stealth, green plants when they emit smoke is poison, and so on. It's within the universe. It's something that every player going into the game will have zero context about, but they can learn it through onboarding and through the applications of the mechanics. Now let's say I build a game where all the puzzles require you to understand cryptology, and solving cryptograms, and figuring out code words, and things like that. Well, that's a real-world application. That was used heavily during World War II. People love cryptograms and other kind of word teasers. But let's say that this is in a 2D hack-and-slash game, where for 80% of the time, I'm running around chopping up enemies like I'm playing The Messenger or Doom. And now you stop this game to ask me to solve a word puzzle. How much of a kind of record scratch moment is that? And you need to, again, be aware that everyone has different knowledge bases when it comes to what they know and understand. You can build a puzzle around, let's say, favorite orchestral classical music composers. That could be something that you are very well acquainted with. But let's say your audience has no idea who Mozart is, or has never heard any symphony before, and now you're challenging them to play these games. That's not going to be really effective as a puzzle for them. In a platformer that I recently played, this is an open world platformer that has a lot of interesting movement tech. It felt like it was going to be a really great game. And then they hit me with a puzzle that requires me to understand and type things out in binary. And my enthusiasm just went like that. And this is why you need to be very careful based on who you're marketing your game to and what are the potential hurdles that can stop someone from playing your game. Again, it can take very little to get someone to stop playing a game, and one of the worst things that you can do from a player retention standpoint is to introduce such a flip on the mechanics or the gameplay, let's say 50 to 75% done your game, where you're past that point where the player's invested and they're still playing, and then the game just comes to a brick wall and the person ends up leaving frustrated. Because if they leave your game frustrated because you kind of pull the rug out from underneath them, they are not going to come back to check out your next game. And even if someone does give them a solution to a puzzle or get them through it, they may just be like, well, if I got stuck at that one, what's the chance I'll be stuck at the next puzzle? And they're going to quit and never come back. So, to wrap things up for our critical thought, like I said, checking the churn rates for games is a very effective tool as a developer to see what is stopping someone from enjoying your game. And one of the big reasons for that can be skill related. If I can't solve a puzzle or if I can't make this triple jump, wall jump, spin, hover, flutter jump, or I have no idea how to build my character or what the heck is going on in this turn-based combat, those are going to be reasons why people are going to quit. And this is again why effective onboarding and approachability elements are critical for developers, especially indie developers. Remember, if you're going to combine genres or mechanics in an unusual or not really seen before kind of way, you need to make sure that people understand that. As we talked about in an earlier video, when you start combining genres, you are not creating a game that's going to attract everyone from genre A and everyone from genre B. You're going to specifically attract someone who is looking for a game in between A and B. And sometimes this can lead to these different pain points from one genre affecting someone in the other. If you tell me that you're making a very critical thinking puzzle-based game, that, this is going to be a game that's all about trying to solve and crack these puzzles, and then halfway through you introduce a boss from Ultra Kill that you have to fight to move on, people are going to feel like they've gotten cheated. Just again, as you say that, yes, we're going to build this super action, high-octane game, and then we're going to stop the game every 10 minutes for a Towers of Hanoi puzzle, which I'm pretty sure a lot of people are just groaning as I said those words. And for our final point, again, this is why playtesting matters for your game. If people, or if your intended audience is frustrated and they are unable to even get past the opening of your game, no matter how much you think your game is good, something has gone incredibly wrong. And again, listen to when people are getting frustrated or stuck with your game. Even if it is just one person on a Steam forum or in a Reddit or even just one message on Twitter, just because you're only getting one person saying that they're having trouble with your game, that doesn't mean that it's only one person having that problem. Remember, the silent majority is real when it comes to consumers and their interest in your games. If someone leaves your game because they couldn't beat it, they found it frustrating, they're confused by it, they are not going to come back to check out your second, third, fourth, or how many more games you're going to create. And even if someone doesn't finish your game, but they leave on a high note, let's say they've seen everything that it has to offer and they're just like, okay, I want to move on now. Or they beat the game, but they didn't get the super duper fancy ultimate true ending, but they felt they've seen enough and they're happy. Well, your mission is accomplished. If they leave your game as a fan, they're going to come back as a fan. And there is a lot more we can certainly break down with that, but that's going to do it for today's Critical Thought. So, as always, thank you so much for watching. Do the liking, subscribing, and commenting. Check out our Discord and Patreon, and if you're interested in my books on design, they are available wherever books are being sold. Come back for discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games.